I don't know what's going on here. Why can't we see it right? We're full screened, everybody. We're learning. We're interneting. Chicago has halted a $65 million migrant shelter camp because of toxic metals. Funny how that works out. Now, before we read on about this, my initial thoughts are twofold. One, um, they don't actually care about the migrants. It's a political ploy to get voters and to get and to ruin the country. So they don't care what happens to them. Much like, I don't know if you know this. This is going to sound like a joke, but in Europe, they used to put all the gypsies together. Fact. And they found out at one point, I don't know if it was in Romania, but an Eastern European country, I think. But the rest of this is true. They found out that they were putting the gypsies in a migrant camp that was on top of a lead deposit. It was something like however many times you're allowed a very little amount of concentration of lead exposure, obviously, and they were like 4 or 5 times that getting the exposure. The children were insanely exposed to lead, so that sort of comes across of a place you put people when you don't really like them. That's point number one. That's thought number one about that. The second thought I had about Chicago's, migrant camp being on poison metals, it looks like, is that how does this just happen? How do you just have a place, and I believe it's a park we'll read about in a second. How do you just have a park? What's going on at this park where there's just metals all over the place? Chicago plans for a multi-million-dollar tent camp that would shelter 2,000 migrants. Not cool anyways. Why are you housing 2,000 migrants in a camp? Refuse to say send them back, obviously. But the plans are now being scrapped by the state after toxic chemicals and heavy metals were found on site. In the meantime, outside organizations, especially churches, are pitching in to help. Also wrong of them. You can be a church, you can be helpful to people, but you're abating and abetting federal laws. Don't call me a scholar, a Catholic scholar, but I don't believe you're aiding and abetting criminals just out of the goodness of your heart because you want to help them get off the streets. If I go and commit 75 crimes across the United States, and I happen to be sleeping on the street, a church shouldn't take me in if they know that I've committed all these crimes. Okay, just because they are sleeping outside does not mean they are deserving of being given free things. I'm not saying keep them on the street. I'm saying send them back to where they came from, where they have homes. So 3 Chicago aldermen are now calling for the resignation of 7 officials from Mayor Brandon's administration after the city insisted multiple times that the site was still safe to build on, and the most problematic levels of contamination have been removed. $65 million tent camps in the Brighton Park neighborhood near Midway Airport. So you have contaminated lands right near your airport, and you're spending $65 million on it. And my guess is that they started building it, and they're just like, wait a second. It's a little poisonous here. We can't go on. And then they're like, hey, we're spending a lot of money here. We should probably keep going. It contained, the report, mercury, arsenic, lead, cyanide, pesticides, and the now banned cancer-causing compounds known as PCBs on this 9.43-acre property. Did they just not do their due diligence here? Did they buy a poisonous property of 10 acres and the person is just like, well, it looks like you guys got screwed? After the state announced it was permanently canceling plans for the site, Johnson, the mayor, said discovering toxicity there wasn't a surprise. City officials pointed out that mercury had been removed and gravel had been put on top as part of remediation efforts, and that would have been safe. The toxicity, I don't think that I'm the only person who reads that and just immediately thinks of toxicity by System of a Down. That should be the new theme song for the campaign. It's toxic, and now we can sit down and actually talk about what we can do that is humane, that is a concentration camp. I mean, like, this is why. I mean, you got something here. You're trying to put people in a poisonous camp, a poisonous ground, and then you just immediately go to concentration camp. Like, get a grip. Like, it's never with leftism, and I hate. I used to hate it a lot more, to put it in terms of left and right, but you have to call a spade a spade. With leftism, it's never enough to just be like, this is bad. It has to be, like the worst thing ever. So they would have been poisoned had they sat there, have they lived there. And that's horrible enough that the city tried to push it through, but now you have to go through a concentration camp. Do you know what a concentration camp is? Do you know what the word means? If not, shut up. Okay? Guy Richard Zupukis, fake name. I'm calling it right now. The city signed the lease in late October for 91 grand a month to use the land as is. So they're stupid, meaning there were no guarantees about the compliance with health and safety regulations. NBC 5 investigates found. The city and the state have been working toward a goal of letting people and families who have recently migrated to the United States into larger shelters by mid-December. Hundreds of migrants have been waiting for their spots in shelters. Oh no! Sleeping in police stations in O'Hare International Airport in the interim. We'll get to the airport in a second here. The city's plan to feed asylum seekers through the winter also recently fell through. The state stepped in with an additional $2 million in funding on top of the $10 million it had already allocated towards food bank resources. So the city's spending $12.5 million, as it were, to house people who are federal criminals. They've entered the country illegally. They have no right to be here, and they complain about sitting and waiting. And when they don't get what they want, they go to police stations and they go to the airport. How about the people struggling? How about if you don't have money for gas or food, the government gives you some money? How about if you have, if you can't really get an apartment, they help you out maybe with a first month's payment only towards that, not just giving you the money. Now, all of these are not good, I don't think. All these suggestions I just made, because those are basically a welfare state. But as I've said for months now, probably a couple of years now, if we've got billions to spend on Ukraine, billions to spend on Israel, 12.5 million to spend on illegal immigrants, then just give me the money or just don't take it from me in the first place. If you've got $12.5 million to give to people who are illegals and who have completely gamed the system and have no respect for the laws, then just you're just showing me that you have taken way too much of my money. If you have money for that, if you have 50 billion for Ukraine, you have proven that you've taken too much of the people's money, and you need to either be fired or just give the money back, and we'll go from there. Churches are spearheading the opening of new shelters thanks to an alliance faith-based organizations organized via the city, what the city is calling the Unity Initiative. There's more than 100 churches in the city. Blah, 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 blah. We all know it's because they don't have to pay taxes, right? And I'm not, this isn't a campaign about churches being forced to pay taxes. This is a campaign from Andrew Says to say this is why they're doing this. So either they knew, it's clear, if you're going off this reporting, they knew the site was poisonous and they're going to go through it anyway. So they don't actually care about the people. And now they get to say, oh, we're actually going to scrap all these plans. So where does all this money that they've already spent gone? Questions number 1, 2 through 86. And all the way at number 86 will be, well, what are the churches doing with all the money? It doesn't have to be taxed. They get to do pretty much whatever they want with it. Nobody's going to be asking. And they're going to say, oh, we're helping people. And my point here is that every single thing that's happening in the city of Chicago from top to bottom is rotten. You thought getting Lori Lightfoot out was a good thing. I mean, it is, but they always replace it with somebody worse. They always fail upwards. And I'm sure Lori Lightfoot's going to get a spot in the Space Force or something because she looks like an alien. She could probably converse with them. But this new mayor, he's not making things any better as far as I can see. And I was in O'Hare last week, and it's a mess. The airport itself is pretty nice, but, the people running around Chicago are insane. It's insanely infected with liberalism. On the TVs at O'Hare, all it is diversity programs. All that they show on the TVs in O'Hare Airport, you can go and check this out on a loop. Every single business in the airport, they talk about how great their diversity is. Covered this on the bonus podcast if you want to check it out. Showed the commercials. uopod.com. This thing's making noises behind me. There we go. I incidentally turned the volume up. O'Hare Airport, on loop, they're showing commercials about how each business in the airport is better because of diversity. They have a McDonald's commercial where the owners say it's great that their father is Mexican and therefore they are Mexican McDonald's owners. Yeah, and I'm not exaggerating. They have, a You know the little check-in kiosks where you can skip the line, you be part of this club and you can skip the line or whatever, do pre-check-ins. A woman who is the manager of that, she's saying how it's important that little black girls see a woman of color working at the kiosk company. Bullshit, obviously. And it goes on like that. And there's like 20 different commercials. The Shoe Shine Company, if they've got so much they've got so much diversity at the Shoe Shine Company. It's ridiculous. Chicago is a mess. It needs to be restarted as a city.
Turn it up, Jordan.